Great. Thank you so much.
Thank
Jerry,
you.
I'm thrilled to be here and I'm so blessed to have heard the things that I've heard today. They've been inspirational and useful. And I joke that a day like today gives me a reason to shave my legs. Do you remember when you were caregiving and it was just like the days would go by and you'd go, oh, I don't know if I even want to get dressed or if it does any good to get dressed. I learned to wear scrubs, even though I'd been a chaplain for about 10 years when I started my 5 year stint of taking care of both my mom and dad when they were on hospice. But I looked forward to those moments when I had an excuse to shave my legs. And so I'm sharing with you today from my own personal experience when you can't find joy and what it means for you to be able to create those pockets of excellence, those moments that Kathy talked about, shifting our thinking process, the way Christy talked about um, so many of the gifts that uh, Hannah Jane talked about and sang to us about. I want you to think about what if this is not about caretaking? What if there's a bigger picture? And I want to just invite you to think about what the hidden gifts are. Rilke said, love and death are the great gifts that are given to us, and mostly they're passed by unopened. And this was true for me until I began to see that inherent in those moments with the people that I loved were divine gifts, and that it was much more about something greater than myself, something bigger than myself. And it required of me a shift in context. When I recontextualized what was happening, it was very much like the man who walked past a construction zone and said to the mason, what are you doing? And one person said, I'm laying bricks. And for him, the monotony was just one brick on top of another, day after day, day after day. And then he talked to someone who's a mason, like our friend William Fletcher, who really knows what it means to create beauty out of stone. And he said, I'm building a cathedral. You're not changing bedpans. You're not caring for someone who cannot care for themselves. You are in a divine mission that will impact you and generations to come. Carl Fred Broderick called those of us who do the work that you're doing Saviors on Mount Zion, which sounds really grandiose, but I want you to think for just a moment what it means when you pass this on to generation after generation. As a young mother in Wisconsin, my youngest daughter was 3 years old. And I spent a brief time, a day or two, in a local hospital with a minor surgical procedure, and my roommate was a 97-year-old woman named Mrs. Johnson. Now I'm almost 73, so these moments become very memorable to us when we are touched on the heart by someone else and the invitation to come into their lives. And so I said to Mrs. Johnson as I was getting ready to leave, what is it that you would like most of all? And she says, they won't wash my hair while I'm here. They can't wash my hair. And I said, I'll come back. I'll come back and wash your hair for you. And so the very next day, even though I was a young mother with responsibilities and a child at home, I packed up my 3 year old and her crayons and a mat for her to sit on and the tools that I would need to be able to provide Mrs. Johnson with a haircut, with a shampoo, and with ribbons to wear in her hair. And Amelia, the 3 year old, sat on the floor and was participating in that vicariously. Little did I know that as time went by, this would become a touchstone in her life. And she lives a life of service, a life of kindness. Helping hands are a part of her daily thought process. She is immersed in noticing what other people need and providing it for them. for those of us who worry about neglecting the people we love because we're called forth to go into caregiving, keep in mind that there are compensatory blessings and that the joy you will find as this pays off dividends that are as slow sometimes as compound interest, but are as meaningful and powerful as compound interest. They bless the people around us, even in those moments when we think that we're asking them to sacrifice so that we can sacrifice. It's a beautiful story of the circle of life. So for me, the part that was the most challenging was recognizing that in the midst of all of what was happening as I sacrificed for others, there was a compensatory blessing coming back to me. And we've heard that as speakers spoke today before me and shared with you all the ways in which they were experiencing beautiful payoffs, beautiful memories as the time has passed. So I don't want to read to you the slides. I'm going to let Jerry and others put my email address on the chat, and then you can send me a request for the slides, and I'll send those right away to you. Let me do that right now. I'm an old-fashioned girl with AOL, so it's easy to remember. It's my name, LAUREEOLSN at AOL.com. And I'm happy to share these slides with you and have them gifted the way the wonderful book of joy is being gifted to others.
Will you repeat that again?
Yes, it's LAUREE. I put it in the chat. OLSN at AOL.com. So it's my
Perfect.
middle name and my last name without the E in Olsen.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I'm happy to share these slides with you because the slides stand by themselves. And rather than read those slides to you, I'd like to talk about what the slides mean and how they apply to you. So as we go on with looking at where you're going with this, keep in mind, nobody talks about this part. Nobody prepares you. Nobody says you're going to be asked to do one of the hardest things you're ever going to experience, and it will be one of the best things that you've ever experienced. And for you to just fall in love with the process, and also to recognize that what we've been learning is that there's a difference between joy and happiness. Happiness literally has its ties to what's happening. I'm happy if good things are happening to me. Joy comes from a deep, abiding feeling of calm and well-being that transcends events and experiences. Joy is not the absence of pain, but the presence of love. And as you read the invitation by Goethe, he says, I've come to the frightening conclusion that I'm the decisive element. And I want you to think about that. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you. I want you to think about how you're a touchstone and you have the ability to literally change the weather in the lives of the people around you by how you approach, whether you're laying bricks or whether you're creating a cathedral. I want to touch back and piggyback on something that Christy said when she was talking about being able to manage your own thought process, and she described to you what it meant to be thinking those victim thoughts. It's really a challenge to be able to have the presence of mind to see that your events and circumstances and experiences all are colored by your childhood programming, by the self-talk that you use as you describe what's going on in your life, even by your beliefs. If you believe that this is just your tedious job, or whether you really believe you're making a cathedral, a sanctified offering of your time and energy. And in that whole constellation of what's going on and how you're thinking and how you're feeling, you make different choices. And your outcomes literally are different. We see that there are lots of different ways that we can have distortions about our thinking, even just having the people around us with a negative filter. But being aware of that is not enough when it feels like we've jumped out of an airplane and our parachute doesn't open. So I want to share that with you. When I would give management seminars years ago, I would tell the story about a man who jumps out of an airplane, pulls his ripcord, and nothing happens. Pulls the ripcord and nothing happens. And I would say to my audiences, what are his choices? And people would shake their heads. It was like, he has no choices. And I was in Texas where everything's bigger. And this woman at the back of the room with her big hair and her big nails and her big voice shouted out, honey, at that moment he can fly or die. And when caregiving is thrust upon us, sometimes it feels like our parachute didn't open. Sometimes it feels like there's no place to turn. Sometimes it feels that we're beyond our ability to have a control over the process itself. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more in detail, but I do want to clarify a note in this that my email does have the OLSN. AOL wouldn't let me leave the EN in my last name. So it is LAUREE OLSN at AOL.com. So that, and I do want to be able to share these emails with you. As we look again at what it means to deal with the unexpected that we feel we didn't choose, there are ways that we've talked about today. I'm so grateful for the ways that people have pointed out for us to recharge our batteries when our tanks are empty, singing, finding people around us that we can share with. But most of all, I want you to think about your own resilience, your own neuroplasticity of your brain and your ability to be able to see that pain pushes you until purpose pulls you. When we talk about Viktor Frankl, who's also one of my favorite authors, the idea that we were given the opportunity to make our own meaning and to live in a world today where we have the power to design our own lives, unlike those who were forced into concentration camps. We know that the story we tell, as Christy pointed out, can make or break our attitude. But in this telling of the story, you get to be that Savior on Mount Zion who breaks the cycle. If you were judged, choose understanding. It's very much like the prayer of St. Francis. If you were rejected, choose to accept others. If you were shamed, be the person you needed when you were hurting, not the person who hurt you. Vow to be better than what broke you, to heal instead of becoming bitter, so you can act from your heart and not your pain. There's incredible power in the opportunity to use this gift of service to others in the refinement of your own soul. When hospice was first beginning to be acknowledged, it started in France, and through the wisdom of those individuals, the Sisters of Mercy who were creating hospice, the standard was that orphanages and old folks' homes were placed together so that grandmas and grandpas took care of children and children took care of grandmas and grandpas. There was a wisdom of that 3-generation caregiving model. And we see it today as the enrichment that Christy talked about when her grandma came to her home. We see it today when we hear a husband talk about a wife and the care that was such an enrichment and such a moment for him. I'd like to share two examples with you. Michael Mclean is a singer-songwriter, and he gives me permission to share this with you. His father, Hugh, was one of my patients years ago and was in a care center. Hugh had two children, Michael and Michael's sister Marianne. Marianne made a memory book so that when I went in for my first visit with Hugh, it was not an awkward moment. Hugh was understandably a little suspicious about a stranger coming in, imposing herself on his time and into his space. But as I sat down next to him on the couch and picked up Marianne's memory book, I was gifted with the training that allowed me to open the book, and instead of saying, "Hugh, tell me about these stories," I was able to say, "Hugh, look at you. You are such a good daddy. Look at you. Here you are with Marianne, and she made this book for you so that we could talk about that. And Hugh, look at this wonderful picture of your family. You are so blessed. You must have been such a great dad." And this man who was sitting very distant from me began to lean up against me the way our grandkids do when we read them a story, and put his head on my shoulder, and we looked at those stories together. In his last days, even when I went to see him and I sat next to his bed and he could not move much, I would begin to sing to him Love at Home, and he would swing his legs over the side of the bed and put both hands in mine and listen with rapt attention as I sang to him those words that were so familiar to him. Towards the end, Michael said he went to see his dad, and that his dad walked into the room and put his arms around Michael and looked him in the eye and said, "I don't know who you are, but I know I love you." Those are the moments we live for. Those are the moments we create through conscious, intentional love brought into the space. And sometimes it requires the help of another person. In the world of hospice, those angels are often called volunteers. Early in the days of video cameras, so you know this is a long time ago, early in the days of video cameras, there was a volunteer that I worked with in Salt Lake City. It was an unusual circumstance that with a insurance problem, the wife was in one care facility and the husband was in another care facility. They had a marriage of loving for many years, and being separated was heartbreaking for them. This volunteer figured out a creative way to be able to solve the problem. He would take his own video camera, go into the wife's room, and record a message from her to her husband. Drive the 15 minutes to the other care facility, play it for the husband, and record another message and bring it back to the wife. Those kinds of creative problem solving answers to unusual problems are I think, the result of listening to our hearts. They're from finding that there's something bigger going on in our connection to the people around us than just getting a sheet changed or just making someone a meal. Those ordinary mundane things certainly are needed and necessary, but what gives us grace notes in our life and in our day is when we look for, how do I go that extra mile? How do I find that special answer to that special problem? In the world of taking care of ourselves, I have to say that there were 3 things that saved me from my 5 years of caregiving for my mother and father when they were both on hospice. First was I had a really good friend who gave me the gift of every month she did my fingernails. I know.
Loree,
Yes.
hang on just a moment. So most people are saying they can hear you okay, but there's a few that are really struggling. I'm so sorry. Can you speak just a little tiny bit louder?
Yes, I will. And I'm
I'm
surprised that,
sorry.
no, I'm surprised that when we were doing let me see, does that help at all?
It does for me. I think that should work fine.
Okay. I turned up my volume a little bit, but I'm hoping that that will help others.
Okay, we'll try it.
I'm happy to talk with someone individually. If you email me and you have questions or there's a part that I shared that you missed, then just let me know and I will share with you. Let me do this audio settings for just a moment. Volume. Does that help at all? I turned up the volume on my speakers. I'm hoping that that will help some, and I'm happy to spend time answering questions and spending time with you individually if there is something that you missed that you want me to clarify or you want me to go over. I'm happy to spend time doing that with you. Also, we have a caregiver support group via Zoom every Wednesday evening from 5:30 to 6:30. And Dana is with you and she can put that information in the chat so that you know how to access that. If you send me your email to my email address, then I'll send you that link and I'll put you on our email list for caregiver support every week so that you can get those questions answered.
So
And
it's virtual, right?
yes, it is. It's a Zoom meeting. It's free,
Okay.
just an
And
hour.
then so I think we have that in our calendar on our website as well at mountainland.org. We have a calendar for caregivers and seniors, and it
Perfect.
is there. If I can find that, I'll add that to this.
Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate that a lot.
Okay.
There are so many things that we learn from others. For example, in this caregiver group, we have a couple of people who have Parkinson's, and so they're able to share at different points of the journey things that they learned that help them to be more patient, that help them to be more responsive. We have people who are already past the caregiving stage who can say there is an end in sight. We have people who are just starting. We had one participant who joined us the week that her loved one passed. Her mother passed away on a Saturday, and she was with us again on Wednesday to let us love her better. And sometimes we just need those people around us. I said that there were three things that made it possible for me to get through the 5 years I took care of my mom and dad. Something as simple as going to my friend's house and getting my nails done. I called her manicure table her manicure ministry because she was always there with a listening ear and great advice. I was also working in a specific service area for 3 hours on a Saturday, and I loved getting away from caring for my parents and serving others in a how do I say it, non-family setting. It really did give me a lot of relief. And then the third way, I had neighbors who would come and listen to me, and they were amazing. They were my ministering angels, my ministering teachers. And I know, I know they would say, "Oh, we're going to go into that Olsen home, and we better have dinner ready. We better have our kids handled because that woman is going to bend our ear for at least an hour." And they were so generous with their time. It's like when I was a young mother and I needed someone to talk to who talked grown up. I needed someone to talk to who talked the world, who talked other than caregiving, who talked about being out there where life was still happening, and and the world was still exciting. It was a challenge for me to reinvent myself when I was no longer caretaking. I had identified myself as a caretaker. I was comfortable and familiar with caretaking, and I had to reinvent myself. It was very much a gift that I had the career as a hospice chaplain to return to, but it was a challenge. When I begin to think about how we have talked today about caring for each other and looking at how it is that you can measure whether you are healing or not, you'll find yourself becoming much more observant, less judgmental. These are the gifts. More responsive and less reactive. More self-love and less self-sabotage. More boundaries and less resentments. You learn how to say no to yourself, to others, so you can say yes to yourself. More inner peace, less outer chaos. More clarity and less confusion, more being and less doing. You're a human being, not a human doing. And more faith, less fear. Inside of those beautiful gifts that are described in this slide, can you see that there is more going on for you than just taking care of someone you love who can't take care of themselves anymore? In your own journey, it's easy to start to think that the world is a dangerous, unpleasant, unhappy place. But in our own journey, we see that the world is indeed full of peril. And in this world, there are many dark places. But there is still much that is fair. And though in all the lands love is now mingled with grief, it still grows perhaps greater, and it grows greater with every kind deed you do. I'm not going to read this particular slide to you, but I want you to begin to think about what it means to be intentional in your caregiving. I want you to look at these slides as an invitation to recognize that there is a joy, deep and abiding, under that layer of sadness, under that layer of loss. Emily Bronte, who certainly knew about what it meant to lose and what it meant to have dark days, described it beautifully. She says, "But when the days of golden dreams had perished, and even despair was powerless to destroy, then did I learn how existence could be cherished, strengthened and fed without the aid of joy. I became strong enough to become an alchemist in my own world. I literally could spin sadness into joy, straw into gold, in those moments when I was with love, looking at the people that I was caring for through eyes that were tinged by a different view of what my job was. Then when I felt alone, then when I was tired, then when I was overwhelmed, I recognized that I had a source, a deep inner wellspring that was my spirit, and that I had angels walking with me, that I was on a divine mission, and that these people that I was walking with, my parents, were indeed the bringers of great gifts that would go on giving in my own life long after they were gone. I'm going to share something with you a little personally. My mother and father were great. They had a great love affair. And two things happened. My mother was on hospice for a number of years as a result of a stroke, and she was a wonderful communicator, but lost her ability to speak. But she didn't lose her sense of humor. And in my room, the light switch for my bedroom was outside my door. And it was one of her delights to flip that light switch on and off when I was working at the computer, just to let me know that she was still able to tease me and able to make me laugh. You know, of course, after she passed, there were days when I would be sitting at my computer and my lights would flicker. I get to tell the story that that's my mom letting me know that she was still close by. Those are sacred, tender moments. And 10 years later, when my dad passed away, in the care of Simbi and the wonderful members of my team who were watching over him, he and my mom, in their spirit selves, came and stood by the side of my bed, and I got to see them holding hands, the completion of their journey from my viewpoint, in a way that I would never have imagined possible. As a chaplain, I recognize that there is more to caring for someone than the physical or the medical, that there is a spiritual element, and that if we get so caught up in just the physical or the medical, we miss the opportunity to see what those spiritual signs are that present themselves in a flickering light or in a vision, whether it was imagined or whether it was really a gift of the Holy Spirit, to validate that the time I spent was sacred, that I was making something beautiful that would last into my own old age, and that would provide a touchstone for my daughter when she was 3, that would bear fruit when she was 30, and now when she's almost 50, that is the cornerstone of how she chooses to find joy in her own journey as a single mother. I love that I get to share my stories with you. I love that I get to hear what everyone has done and looked for and brought into their own lives and shared with others, whether it's musical or whether it's pictorial or whether it's tips and tricks. I love that we have blessed each other's lives today. We're in the beehive state, and today we got to be cross-pollinated by the gifts and the talents of the people around us. I also know that this is a sacred time to be able to ask each other, how has the disruption of our world during the time of COVID invited us to reinvent our lives, reinvent ourselves, and reinvent our influence in the world, instead of just letting life happen to us? When that parachute doesn't open, the joke of that story is a person can either scream all the way down or enjoy the view. Our lives are short in God's time. It is true that all of us will at some point in time look that specter of our mortality in the eye and know that we are just for a moment in this world. We can either scream at the unfairness or we can literally learn to enjoy the view.